Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto prevented the Fourth Shinobi War. It was their last, desperate gambit. Their last hope. They pinned everything on a prayer that he could save them, and now, he's not even sure if he can make it count anymore. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 6. It was 3 weeks before he actually started feeling the first of the effects. He should have expected this, really. It was one of the most significant benefits of using nature chakra in the first place. You could detect everybody. It'd be weird if he didn't remember what it was to feel the full effect of nature chakra coursing through his veins. I mean, in his perfected sage mode he could practically feel the fly that landed on the leaf 100 yards away. He was in tune with nature, and that really didn't have a limit. Here and now, he could feel some of the chakra signatures around the village. Just a handful for now, the strongest were the ones that stood out the most. Tsunade he recognized immediately. Sarojiji he had to wait till the old man had gotten to his office and stayed there for a while. He found his Umbu too. She seemed somewhat familiar, so he probably had sensed her somewhere specific during the war, but his memory just wasn't being jogged. Maybe she'd guarded him back in his original time or something. As he made his way to the academy, he kept on trying to make use of this new little development, sensing the different people here and there and trying to recognize them. Later, with some practice, he'd make a point of pegging the chakra signatures of all the ones that were important to him. That way he could find them no matter what. It was as he was thinking this, that he felt his Umbu escort with the familiar signature suddenly fall back and start turning away. It was a mystery as to why that was when his senses found another signature, this one suppressed, but quickly becoming more apparent to his newfound sixth sense as it edged closer. It made him smile. At least one of his old sensei were okay. Tired face. All right, everyone settle down. Zae raised her voice as the students all but stampeded out of the academy building into the adjacent training grounds. Nothing, not even she, could ever keep a class of academy students' excitement completely suppressed when it came time for taijutsu matches. It was a practice reserved for the fourth-year students about to graduate, the fourth year of course, being the most physically demanding of the curriculum. The other 3 years were devoted to the more mental aspects of the shinobi profession. The only physical things done in the first 2 years was physical conditioning, exercises, tree jumping, hand seal practice, etc. etc. Actual taijutsu, weapon and ninjutsu practice didn't see practical application until the 3rd year, mainly it was practiced on the academy instructors. It was in the 4th year when students were finally allowed in any official capacity to face off against each other, that way the instructors could get a clear picture on who stood where in order to properly assign them to teams. The practice was done, normally 3 times a week, with the schedule randomized, so the students' minds and bodies would get used to the prospect of fighting whenever it was asked of them. Of course, most kids performed to expectations. The notable taijutsu powerhouse was, surprisingly, not a clan kid, but an orphan. To be fair though, most of the clans were missing from this year. No Aburame, Hyuga, Yamanaka or Nara. The best ninjutsu kid was an Uchiha though, as far as Naruto could tell, and the best kunai and shuriken flinger was, surprisingly, one of the 2 Akimichi of the group. Alright children. The diminutive teacher said, taking her place at the side of the practice ring. Let's all try to beat each other with civility, yes? She drily quipped as she looked through the randomized lineup for today. Gokiwadu and Shizuka Moroi, please come on up so we can begin the learning. So, who you gonna get paired up with this time? Shizune asked, plopping down next to him to wait with everyone else. Dunno. That was mostly true. But while the roster was mostly randomized, he'd noticed that his opponents were getting tougher and tougher. His first fight had been against Naotora, the class dead last. She was brash and loud like him. But she'd underestimated him, as did 90% of the class, and he'd used that to catch her completely off guard. And since she was the dead last, his next opponent didn't think much of the win. and so on and so on. Now they were catching on, so that element was out. But more than that, he noticed that each of his partners was just that much more dedicated, that much faster, stronger or smarter. Apparently, Zae was trying to climb him up the ladder to see where exactly he should fit when it came to team placements. So no, he didn't know per se who his next enemy would be, but he could guess that it would be one of the class middlings most likely. Though she was starting to run out of time if that was really her game, and it wasn't just random chance as they said. They only had a handful of days left. I know you don't know, but come on, take a guess or something, Naruto. She ruffled his hair, then he heard the sharp inhale from her on one side and footsteps to his other. Turning to look, he found none other than Taida, the favorite for this year's top rookie. He smiled. Hey Taida. The young man smiled back. Mind if I join you? He shifted a bit, shifting against Shizune to allow enough room for Taida to sit next to him. He was big for a kid. The only classmate that matched his height was one of the two Akimichi, physically stronger than most kids their age too, though that came at a trade-off of being somewhat slower than half the kids in the class too. Though, truth be told, given his family history, that might not be exactly a bad thing. While not of any Konoha clan, that did not mean the Yusa name was a run-of-the-mill family. It was a samurai clan. Samurai had always been the standing force of the daimyo of the various states. As far as he remembered from his day, they never really played much of a part in the hidden village affairs. They were, frankly, glorified clients. Keep our borders safe from the other daimyo, kill whoever we need you to kill without question, and we'll line your pockets with enough money to keep this show running forever. Was the status quo. This time around, the status quo was a bit more skewed. The first-year curricula, in political and historical lessons, had nearly held him back from meeting his own personal deadline of graduating in a single year. While ninja were a force to be reckoned with on any battlefield, having unlocked the secrets of chakra, and the array of skills that came with such, samurai were still very much the dominant military power of the continent. One ninja was worth a handful of samurai, but there were a hell of a lot more samurai than there was ninja in the daimyo's employ. Now, the daimyo could do more than threaten them with cutting off the cash flow. He could threaten them with war. Or more likely extermination. What's more, he could win. It would be a brutal and bloody win for either side, that would effectively eviscerate both parties, leaving them as little more than carrion for the vultures that would swoop in from all sides to eat at the carcass. But now the daimyo around the continent seemed to have decided to hold on to some of their testicles when the villages were formed this time around. That left them with some negotiating leeway. One of those, in Konoha at least, was a student exchange program. A child of a samurai clan. A child of a shinobi clan. Leaving their homes to live and serve their new families in whatever way was seen fit. This was to promote a lasting peace, friendship, love and trust between the great houses. Unofficially, it was the samurai better preparing themselves for the eventuality of fighting shinobi. If not domestic ones, then definitely foreign. No child from a samurai clan would be taught the true fighting techniques of the samurai beyond a handful of basics, when it came to sword wielding. A child from a shinobi clan, though, especially Hyuga and Uchiha, that one had some trade to show off when he went off to his new home. That one could answer questions and teach them. Then, when the kids went back home, the samurai kid had 5 years shinobi experience and secrets under his belt. The shinobi kid had 3 years of philosophical study and 2, at best, of sword combat training, since most samurai started training their children at the ages of 14. Not exactly a huge amount of time to learn things from grand masters and such. But oh well. Such is life. Half the time the samurai kid just ended up learning sword techniques anyway, so Konoha wasn't exactly a victim that lived up to their side of the bargain either, at any rate. Taida sat and Naruto resisted the urge to poke some fun at Shizune, who, quite obvious to him, had something of a crush on the guy. It would get him a few laughs, but she knew where he lived. The fight was decent as far as academy-level students go. Both of them had their strengths and tried to use them. But one good kick that smacked against a forehead down to do, and that was that. The other fights were, for the most part, much the same. A good lucky hit normally ended them. Rarely was the fight reduced to out-brawling the other, and only the Akimichi ever got their opponents to yield, and even then, only when they managed to get them in a good hold, which by now many students had learned to avoid by any means necessary. Kato Shizun and Kanbei Shin, take your places. Zae finally called. Shizun took a breath before standing. Wish me luck. Naruto nodded and smiled. Good luck. She marched down to the practice ring, standing opposite her opponent. Kanbei wasn't anything particularly special from what he could tell, no real strengths, no real weak points either. Begin. Shizun opened up with a volley of practice shuriken, a textbook tactic to get her enemy off balance when she closed in, and it worked well enough. The moment Kanbei used to dodge, she was closing the distance, launching herself at the young man with a flying kick, knocking him flat on his ass despite his hasty defense with the unbalanced footing. She jumped, looking to capitalize on her early advantage with a pounce to pin him to the ground, only for the aspiring Genin to roll out of the way, kicking at her ribs with a clumsy kick that, nevertheless, hurt and knocked her on her side as both students scrambled to get back up. Tired face. The door was flung open with a crack that drove the knob into his wall. Was this your idea all along? Orochimaru turned around, looking up from his book as he raised a slender eyebrow. You barging into my office looking for all the world as though you wished to strangle me? No, I don't believe this was any plan of mine. You haven't taken on a student in 6 years and suddenly you're applying to take a team. He snapped the book closed, smirking. You and Sensei have been pestering me to take a more active role in the village for a while now. I figured why not start with this? Just as Naruto's about to graduate then? Coincidence. Besides, I placed myself on the reserves list. I'm just there to dash. Convince whoever gets assigned as a sensei to his eventual team to step down so you can fill in the spot. Oh, come now. He smiled blithely. Where's the trust, Suchan? Oh, screw you. He marched to a chair, seating himself on it as he tossed his book on the end table, and laced his hands over his stomach. What exactly are you complaining about? That you're using Naruto as some kind of stepping stone, Oro. He pursed his lips, mulling over the thought, then he smirked. I might be just a little bit guilty of such. But what exactly are you complaining about? I'm the best possible sensei in this village, just look at Enko-chan. She's one of our strongest whack jobs, I'll give you that. We're all a little crazy, Tsunade. He doesn't need you making it worse, or you making some kind of statement. And his teammates won't need you neglecting them in favor of the prodigy. Which he is. The other students will get by, but the whole point of early academy enrollment is to bring those talents to their full potential. And then you wonder why I say Sara-sensei spoiled you rotten. The sighed over dramatically, smirking faintly as he saw how his actions irritated her. If there was one thing Tsunade hated, it was being dismissed. Oh well. I suppose I'll just have to shoulder the burden of Sensei's partisanship. Is that all? Don't make me kick you through the wall. She growled. He opened his eyes, looking up at her, just the slightest bit more serious, though the smile remained. You know how this is gonna end by now. You'll shout and scream and I'll ignore you completely and do whatever I want. If it comes down to a fight, we'll blow up half the village training grounds before Sensei shows up to have us pulled apart, where we'll get a timeout and a rather stern lecture regarding the woes caused by mass property damage, and then I'll still do whatever I want. So can we skip all of that and just get to the me doing whatever I want part? Uranus, you know that? The smile spread. I might be just a little bit guilty of such. It was just a few minutes after she'd left that a familiar older gentleman opened the door to his office, in a similar fashion, driving the knob that much deeper into the cracked wall as he held an equally familiar application form. Was this your idea all along? The Sannin smiled, half frustrated, half sardonic. No. I don't believe it was. Tired face. Ow. Big baby. Naruto teased. She smacked him upside the head. Shut up. Then her hand returned to her jaw. That really hurt. He had no doubt, it looked like it hurt. If she didn't live with Tsunade, she'd probably be sporting an ugly bruise for the next week. As it was, it'd be gone by tomorrow most likely. She managed to win, but one really good punch had nearly taken her out of the fight when half the class could have sworn her jaw had broken given the sound of the hit. To everyone's surprise, and his personal relief, it sounded worse than it was, and she kept herself in the fight, managing to carve out a win. She landed enough hits to have Zae call the match in her favor. Now they were down to just a handful more students, and Naruto was starting to wonder when the hell he was going to be. Uzumaki, Naruto and Yusu Taida, please take your places. Zae called, a hush leveling the area before each student began to murmur with one another. Huh, looks like she decided it best to work from the top to the bottom rather than the bottom to the top. He stood up, listening as Taida did the same, both of them marching down to the practice ring. When they arrived, Taida bowed at the waist. If there was one thing that could be said about the samurai clan boy, it was that he was polite, and did his best to follow the traditions of his family. Which meant his greatest strength was essentially taijutsu. He aced all of his tests and written tactic exams, was slightly above average in accuracy, but most likely due to his upbringing before coming to the village he didn't put as much effort in his ninjutsu, so that was just average. Which essentially meant, especially due to his size, he had to use his ninjutsu to its fullest advantage over him. He took his stance, the basic academy stance. Taida did the same, though his was a bit more rigid in his foot positioning. He probably wouldn't use too many kicks if that was the case. So, overcoming the taijutsu reach advantage wouldn't be impossible, just unlikely now. Begin. Zae shouted. With a hand seal, Naruto focused. Bunshin no Jutsu. He was never good at making a single, regular clone. 100 was an entirely different matter. Within a second the academy practice grounds were covered from corner to corner in grinning blondes. The students gasped, even Zae leaned forward in her seat, looking intently now at the fight. Taida's eyes widened, but in quick motion drew his shuriken and began throwing. A few of the clones dispelled as the weapons cut through the fragile illusion that formed them. The rest charged. To Naruto's surprise, Taida didn't choose to flee as most shinobi would have done, trying to get to a more advantageous position, or even buy time in order to think of a plan. He held his ground, bracing himself. Charging in the middle of his clones, Naruto grinned. It was a good plan. He could think of more than a few ways to kill his enemy, none would fail. He'd gotten too good at killing dead things that refused to stay down for an aspiring genin to have a prayer, even with him like this. But he didn't want a clean win. He just wanted to see how much work he still had waiting for him. How much distance he'd have to cross before he could even have a prayer. The clones struck, and the blows passed him by, doing no damage and merely dispelling themselves with the fragile break. Until finally there was one solid kick across his face that nearly knocked him over. Until his hand snapped forward and grabbed the owner of the offending limb. With a brutal punch to the stomach that knocked the wind out of him, and a follow-up that hit him about as hard as Shizun's opponent had hit her, striking him across the cheek, Naruto scarcely had time to catch his breath before he was thrown onto the ground with a solid thud. Not even fast enough to avoid an academy student. He recovered and looked up as Taida pounced, looking to pin him to the ground and get the win. And for a moment, he was not in the academy training grounds. He was not facing an all-too-polite exchange student. He was not in a friendly test. He was in a battlefield. The screams of dying, wounded men rising up to a crescendo of noise around him, a hurricane of sound that clawed at his ears as he looked up at the lone Sharingan eye spinning in its iris, the crackle of lightning roaring over the battlefield noise as Konoha's last Hokage rushed in for the kill, the howling of 1,000 birds meeting the unrelenting force of a Rasengan before his own deathblow came at the hands of a tearful Sakura, his body sealed and burned by his remaining student. the last Hokage, the first of Team 7. His chakra surged, taking form in his hand, the shape of a whirling sphere coalescing into the faintest silhouette before he caught himself, blinked. The memories of a dead man in a dead future vanishing like the ghosts of shadow, and he holds back from the deadly blow. From sheer reflex, he vanishes in a puff of smoke, leaving only an Academy standard explosive trap at his feet. Taida's eyes widened, his legs bracing to move when the thing exploded in a massive cloud of smoke, leaving him sputtering and hacking up a lung. Gotcha. The students heard through the cloud before Taida stumbled out of the impenetrable smoke, still hacking up his lungs with tears leaking from his eyes. Match. The students heard Zae shout before a quick E-rank Winjutsu did its work to blow the cloud away, revealing Naruto sitting at the edge of the ring, grinning from ear to ear despite the bloody lip. Soon enough the muttering of the other students began and Zae clapped thrice to get them all to calm down. She looked tense, her lips pursed a bit more than usual as she looked them over. Naruto didn't dare look up, worried that if he did, and she'd seen that moment, if she'd felt the killing intent, his look would be all the confirmation she needed. Alright students, we're done for the day now. I suggest you all go home and enjoy your weekend. Next week will be your last before the final examinations, and we see which one of you made it. Good luck. And with that the teacher began to gather her things. Taida made his way over, still coughing a bit, his eyes still red from tearing up. A good match, the raven-haired youth said, bowing at the waist, smiling as he straightened. If that had been actual explosive tags, you'd be dead in that case too. The faux 4-year-old grinned once more, this damn smile slipping on so very easily all over again. Ha, that was fun. I want a rematch. Taida's smile grew a bit, holding just the slightest bit of bemusement. You are rather odd, Naruto-san. Tired face. By the time he got back home Naruto was full and satisfied. Tsunade had picked him and Shizune up, healed their cuts and bruises, and then treated them to an early celebratory lunch. 3 more days and he'd find out who exactly he was getting on a team with. He'd be a Genin, one step closer to Hunter Nin. When he stepped into his home, it was to be greeted by the now familiar sensation of his nightly watcher already in wait and Kakashi-sensei leaving, with his shift now done with her arrival. It was a moment's curiosity that wormed its way into his brain, idly trying to think of who she was. The signature was familiar but strangely alien. As he went about his nightly routine, getting ready to sleep, that idle curiosity kept on gnawing at him, getting just a little bit stronger. A little bit more irritating. Finally, as he was about to step into bed, he realized something. Why the hell doesn't he just ask? And so, with a sharp about face, he follows the signature, marching out of his room and down the hallway towards his potted plant. He stretches out his hand. And with a glimmer in the air, the genjutsu falls away, revealing the woman in an umbu mask. She's surprised, any umbu would be really. But still, he can't recognize her behind the mask. He smiles up at her. Hi. I'm Naruto. What's your name? She tilts her head to the side, looking at him as though she is the most curious of hawks. One that had just found a rodent willing to walk up to it in order to curiously sniff at its talons. In a way, he rather supposed he was. Chapter 7. She didn't tell him her name. It had taken almost 5 minutes for him to get more than a go back to sleep, Uzumaki-san. The conversation was short, clipped, a little awkward, and a little amusing from his perspective. He supposed he should have expected such. She was probably still reeling at the fact that he had found her at all. But still, she didn't give him her name. So, he just called her Anchan. He'd nearly made Kakashi trip out of his tree when he called him Busan the next day. Either the two of them were too embarrassed to say that they'd been caught, or Gigi had decided to take on a wait-and-see approach regarding this little development. Kakashi could still hide from him with a little more effort though. He did it the next day. He was good enough. Anchan always had just a little bit of her chakra exposed though. just enough for him to pick up her signal. Still, this livened up his days a little. For nearly the last week every day he'd go out to do some training, and now had the full and unbridled capacity to ask Kakashi for advice whenever he found him. Which happened to be whenever Kakashi didn't want to put in the full effort to hide well. So, with the Umbu having no orders to do the contrary, and not being a big enough as to ignore him completely, not having his book helped in this last bit, reluctantly gave a little advice, and even showed him the basics of an Umbu chakra control exercise when he noticed that such was what Naruto was primarily working on. Then at night, when he'd get home, he'd make dinner for himself and Inchan, something that primarily consisted of ramen. All the while he would talk her ear off, hoping to get a word of response, but mostly just talking to her while she just stood there. He never ate a bite of the food while he was awake, but it was always gone by the time he woke up. He hoped she wasn't just throwing it away. Tonight was the last night before the team assignments, and he was practically bouncing off the bloody walls. Just one more day and he'd be a genin again, step 1 would be finished with. He finished off his shower drying himself off before he dressed and stepped out of the bathroom. He was 5 now, so just one more year before he wouldn't need to use that thing anymore. He sensed as Kakashi left and Inchan arrived. "Inchan," he called, smiling. The woman didn't even put up the pretense of stealth anymore, marching in through his front door, judging by the sound. He marched out of his bathroom, stepping out to the hallway where he found, much to his surprise, his dining table overlaid with a number of bags, stuffed with food. "You cannot keep having ramen every day?" The flat drawl brought his eyes over to her, standing in a corner halfway across the room, cloaked from head to toe as if she'd never moved. It was impressive considering his whole table was full of stuff. "Oh, come on, I make good ramen." "Not anymore, you don't," she answered in a, to all senses, completely impassive tone. But Naruto recognized smug satisfaction a mile away, and his danger senses were tingling. He blinked, confused for a second before he paled, bolting out of the room and into the kitchen. It was a moment later when half the neighborhood was woken up by his anguished cry of despair. "Tired face. I hate you," he hissed, stuffing the last of the groceries into its proper place in his now empty cabinets. "I'll live," she replied from the other room. He huffed, staring up at the assortment of foods. "What am I supposed to maki? Food. Everyone's a comedian or something," he muttered to himself. Between Zae, Dan and now Inchan he was getting rather tired of witty retorts and dry sarcasm. He looked up again, pulling out a bag of rice, and then picking out some meats from his freezer. A little while later he set 2 plates down on his table, already knowing Inchan wouldn't eat now, but leaving it out for her anyway. The chicken was a bit salter than it should be, and the rice a little undercooked, but not bad for a first try if he did say so himself. It was edible at least. And this time it didn't end with a burnt refrigerator, exploding toaster, and an electrical fire in the bathroom. "Hey Inchan," he called. "Any idea who's gonna turn out to be my sensei tomorrow?" "None," she answered truthfully. "You'd be better off asking Busan." He was about to ask who the hell that was when he recalled that was the very name he'd placed on Kakashi to keep up appearances. "I guess he'd see more of the academy since he's around during the day." She said nothing to that. Finally, he was done. Hopping off his chair, he took his place and marched onto the stool to wash it in the sink before putting it away. He marched right up to his nighttime watcher, smiling at her. "Night Inchan." She nodded. He leaned forward and hugged her. Once more he got that feeling of being a mouse beneath the gaze of the hawk. One that was beginning to wonder why its talons hadn't carved their way through soft rodent flesh yet. He giggled, letting her go and heading off to bed. The next morning the plate was empty. "Tired face. All right then, class." Zae called, clapping thrice as she set her books down on the desk. "Today is the last day. And all of you will now be assigned to teams where you'll most likely be paired up with at least one member of this class who you can't stand, and you'll all have to look at each other and work together every day for the next few years. Aren't you all excited? Naruto fought down a snicker. That was fairly accurate, all things considered. She left out the part of how the teams eventually grow to consider each other family though. Alright, now let's get this started, Team 1 dash. This is so exciting. Shizun whispered beside him, and he has to smile a little more. He could barely remember the day he was assigned to teams. But he did remember the excitement, the anticipation rushing through his limbs. He keeps that moment for as long as he can, grips it. Every good memory is something he tries to hold on to as much as possible. Otherwise, the bad ones will overwhelm him when those moments come where he can't just block them out anymore. And those moments are there, circling like ravenous wolves, waiting to sink their fangs deep into his flesh. Team 4-ZAE calls. Kato Shizun, Inazuka Katsui, and Yoshinari Itsu. Your sensei will be Munuri Oshika. Oh, that's me. That's me, Naruto-chan. She hugged him, so suddenly he almost slid off his chair as she squealed into his hair. He was happy for her. It seemed for a moment she was torn between hugging him and waiting out for his own team to be announced and leaving with hers. Soon enough though, she left with hers. Team 8. Naruto Uzumaki dash. His ears practically swiveled forward to hear better. Naotora Ryoko and Kuritsuru Hachiba. Ryoko. He thought, turning to look at the girl he'd beaten in the practice ring just a few weeks ago, his first opponent in it. The class dead last. That means that. Congratulations, Mr. Uzumaki, you've not only managed to graduate within a year, but you also managed to snag the top spot. ZAE remarked. As expected of my future student. A voice hissed from somewhere behind him. Naruto's blood went cold at that unmistakable voice. No. Turning to look at the back of the class, Naruto found none other than the snake Sennin morphing out of a wall, smirking at him. Tired face. The first words out of Naruto's mouth the second he got to the designated meeting place at the village edge was a vehement query. Was this your idea the entire time? The snake Sennin paused, lips pursing, almost in displeasure for a moment before he schooled his features. Does it matter? He guessed it didn't. He was still stuck in the same boat regardless. And it had been him that had showed off his memories to get Orochimaru to nominate him. He knew that there was an ulterior motive. He just assumed it was glory-seeking at nominating a strong candidate for the academy, not to actually be his sensei, and take even greater glory when he assumed the credit for having taught said strong candidate. He guessed the motive, he just deduced the wrong method. So, you're really gonna be our sensei then? Ryoko asked, staring up at the man, not with a little bit of awe. While Orochimaru was a known recluse in the village, his prowess as a ninja was known worldwide. He wondered how long it would be before everyone knew him as a sicko and a power-mad lunatic. Sweet. We're getting the best of the Sennin as our sensei. Hachiba grinned, adjusting his new forehead protector. Orochimaru's smile seemed innocent enough, but it made Naruto's skin crawl all the same. The best? Perhaps. But my teaching you remains to be seen, Team 8. The two genin looked confused before the Sennin clarified. The academy merely judges if you children have the faintest potential to actually become genin. I am the one that gets the final say on whether they were right or wrong today. So, you're going to take something of a test. What kind of test? Ryoko grinned. We'll beat it no problem if it gets you as our sensei. Now his smile was clearly predatory, even to them. We'll see. Tired face. It didn't take him long to realize where they were headed. He should have expected it really. The first place he met this bastard is the place where he decides to hold his genin test. Training Ground 44, better known as the Forest of Death, loomed over them like a monolithic beast in its own right. We're going in there? Hachiba asked. As an answer, Orochimaru forms two clones, each one grabbing a genin by the shoulder, as he places his hand atop Naruto's head before the youth can react. Then they're gone in the blur of a Shunshin jutsu. When they appear again, they're in the very heart of the forest. Thickened trees hundreds of feet high blot out the sun, a dreary gloom hangs over the place like a pall. This is your test, the serpent says as his shadow clones dispel, and he takes a few steps forward, away from them. Naruto looks around, searching for danger while trying to keep his eyes fixed on the snake. Ryoko is the one that begins to ask. What exactly are we surviving? Suddenly, all three feel a sharp, burning agony lance up their legs. They each scream and Naruto has enough speed to look down in time to see a snake slithering into the grass, two puncture marks standing out on his clothed calf. The stain of blood darkens the fabric of his pants. You have 3 days, the Sennin said, bringing all three students' eyes up towards his smiling veneer. Make it out of this forest alive, and you're my students. Fail and... well, that should be obvious considering you've just been poisoned. Are you insane? Hachiba shouted. You can't be serious. Naruto drew his kunai and charged and attacked, all his suspicions proven in an instant. Orochimaru moved. His eyes could barely follow the movement before his arm was snagged in an iron-laced grip. The Sannin's strength seemed brutally unreal, as the pale man painfully twisted his arm to just before the point of breaking it. With a single twitch it would snap. With a different one it would dislocate. Not nice, Naruto. The serpent hissed in that slithering voice as he looked to his other two students. 3 days. He repeated. Then you're beyond saving. Then he was gone, releasing Naruto before he melted into the shadows of this forest like a specter. Tired face. The snake Sannin chuckled as he emerged from his Shunshin. The looks on their faces. Was this your idea the entire time? Oh, for God's sake. He snapped, whirling on the intruder that appeared in a similar Shunshin technique, only to reveal Sarutobi's head umbu. Hatake. He all but growled. The next person that asked him that question was going to get hurt. Badly. That poison non-lethal? He trailed off, but the warning was obvious. Something of my own brew, he said, smirking a bit. He always did enjoy seeing his own work in its full splendor. They'll certainly feel like they're dying. The silver-haired ninja nodded. What exactly is the test about? Why not just go with Sarutobi's bell test? The Sannin snorted. Bah. You'd have them chase you around with such a simplistic goal? No. He chuckled. What brings about truth in anyone isn't a goal, and it isn't a mission. His eyes gained something of a distant look, the smile evaporating, and Kakashi had to wonder just where he'd ventured down into his memories. It's fear, he finally said. And facing true danger. Watch and learn, Hatake. This is how Shinobi of Konoha are to be tested. Tired face. He can't be serious. He's not serious, is he? Hachiba shouted, almost sounding hysterical. I'm not waiting to find out if he is. Ryoko replied, raven hair whipping around as she turned to and fro, seemingly searching for a direction to move in. South. Naruto growled, rubbing his arm. What? She asked, whirling around to look at him. We gotta go south. He answered, this place is north of the village. Sounds good to me. Hachiba readily agreed. You sure? This had better not be you trying to look cool or something, Uzumaki. I'm sure. He shot back. This place was too troublesome, twice over, in order for him to forget where the hell it was. Twice the snake had screwed him and his team over here. That was 2 times too many. The second he had the strength to do it, he was shoving a Rasengan down the Sannin's throat. Better be. She snapped. It wasn't long before they were running through the trees. Tired face. From places hidden, Kakashi watched Orochimaru's smile grow a bit. Not a bad deduction from Naruto, the Umbu surmised. Still. He looked around. I recognize this place. We're at the northern edge of the forest, almost 3 days' travel exactly from the forest to the village edge, and that's if you have a clue as to where you're going. Did you set them up to fail or something? The Sannin smirked. Tired face. It was just beginning to approach sundown when the 3 genin could no longer shrug off the truth. They felt horrible. It had started with coughs from there, and all too dry throat, rashes breaking out over their flesh and nausea churning their guts. They each knew it would only get worse. To his shame, Naruto was the first one that made the others stop. He was smaller, his metabolism was faster with his healing, the poison was affecting him at nearly twice the rate of his teammates. He tried to keep pace regardless until finally, his legs failed him on a jump, and he nearly plunged to the forest floor to break a limb, or his neck. It was only the fact that he knew how to stick to a tree that saved him. You okay? Hachiba called a moment later as he came to a stop on another branch. Naruto actually had to take a moment to catch his breath before he could even think about answering. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to hammer its way out of his rib cage. He's the great Uzumaki. He'll be fine. Ryoko mocked through hard-labored breaths. We're the ones that'll keel over, nay? This isn't the time for goddamn jokes. Hachiba growled, we have to keep moving. Naruto looked up at the sun, now red in the sky. No. Ryoko hissed, taking a seat as Naruto managed to gather the strength to pull himself up to the branch he'd been hanging off of. We've got to get food and make some kind of camp before the sun sets. Make camp. To what? Sleep. Yes, numbnuts, we need that. We also need to get food. We could be almost out of here. We have to keep on moving. No. We have to make camp because if we keep on going and we're still stuck here later it'll be too dark to see, and we'll be tired, poisoned and hungry. Tired face. The boy panics, Orochimaru observed. He's a genin. Surprised he hasn't burst into tears by now. The girl's keeping her cool well enough though. The pale man nodded. Indeed. I wonder just how she is considered the dead last. Overconfident as hell, didn't study and sucks for everything but taijutsu, even that is just street brawling more than anything else. Orphanage recruit? Close enough. Father's a trader, travels constantly, almost never in the village. Mother's a lover of fine wines, to put it politely. Orochimaru smirked. Old Zae must be losing her touch. Difficult to teach when they refuse to listen. Tired face. They made camp, such as it was. Naruto, allowing nature chakra to guide him as best he could with his lack of practice, found a hollowed-out, dead tree big enough for them to use. He was relieved when Ryoko and Hanbei volunteered to go get food as opposed to gathering firewood. Right now, though he hadn't said anything, he could barely see straight, let alone take down an animal big enough for all of them to eat. And he was only feeling worse. I'll feel better with some food and sleep. He thought to himself, his headache pounding across his forehead. He could not die here. He had to survive this. There was so much he had to do still. He moved about gathering dry leaves and twigs for the kindling. The forest of death had plenty of those, so thankfully he didn't have to expel too much effort. All in all, with his small hands and waning strength, it took 3 trips to gather an amount he thought would be enough to last them the night. The sun had set before his teammates got back. Hachiba managed to get 3 squirrels, Ryoko just caught a single snake. Hers was the more satisfying meal in his personal opinion. Can he really do this? Hachiba suddenly asked as they ate. This is crazy. He can't just kill fellow leaf ninja. Never trust a snake. Naruto wheezed, eyes drooping a bit despite his effort to finish the meal. Thought he was your special mentor or something, Uzumaki. Ryoko hissed, biting into a rather tasteless piece of meat. The forest of death didn't offer much in the way of seasoning. This time, strained as the words were, the hostility was unmistakable in his tone, even if his words hadn't portrayed it just as easily. Kill him, one day. She opened her mouth as though she was about to say something more when she finally took a good look at him. Hey, you okay? Hey. But his world went dark and the two genin had to actually scramble to keep him from tipping face first into the open fires. Ryoko gnawed on her lower lip as she and Hachiba settled Naruto back, watching him convulse on the ground as his eyes rolled so far back only the whites could be seen and blood began leaking from his nose. Shit, he's dying. He's really dying. She screamed, holding him down for lack of anything better to do. No shit, he's dying. He's half our size. Hachiba shouted right back. They held him down, every second basing in unimaginably slow agony for all huddled within that little hollow. It seemed an eternity before he finally settled. What the hell are we gonna do? Hachiba groaned, rocking a little where he sat. He probably didn't notice. Her mouth was dry as she answered, feeling her own heart pounding with adrenaline-fueled fear. We're gonna go to sleep for a few hours, wake up, and carry him out of here the rest of the way, that's what. Then when we get back, we're getting Hokage-sama to hold down that snake bastard so we can cut his balls off and feed them to him. Despite her bravado, her shaking hands and pale features showed just how rattled she really was. Despite how much they needed it, neither child got much sleep that night. And the next morning, Naruto was as pale as a corpse. His breathing didn't sound much better than a dead man's either. Worst of all, he wasn't waking up. Tired face. Orochimaru smirked. Kakashi had long since left and his replacement was keeping to herself a ways off after Kakashi had briefed her and told her not to interfere. The poison had worked its way through Naruto's system even quicker than he'd hoped. Now let's see how they do. Chapter 8. We have to leave him. Ryoko whipped her head up, blinking at her fellow, aspiring genin as though he'd just grown a second head. What? We can't carry him. The boy explained. We'll just tire ourselves out, and we won't be able to dash. We're not leaving him here. She protested, cutting him off. He's still alive. Not for much longer. Hachiba shouted back. It's just been a day, look at him. We've got to move fast, and we can't do that if we dash. She stood up, silver gray hair whipping around her face as she all but snarled. We're gonna carry this dumbass back, and I don't care if I've got to tie him to you, get me? Hachiba opened his mouth, moving to protest when he seemed to think better of it, and closed his mouth. Ryoko looked down, thinking. We'll carry him in shifts. You go first, I go next. I'm not going, dash. You're going first. What do you think, I'm stupid? I carry him first, tire myself out, and you just haul us when it's your turn? You go first. I'll live up to my end. You're not, dash. You can stay here and bitch with me and keep wasting time. You can try to run, and we can fight, wasting even more time, or you can do what I tell you, and we can try to get the hell out of this. Long and short of it is we're not leaving the little bastard. Tired face. Orochimaru watched, yellow eyes gleaming like jewels as the sun rose over the edge of the horizon. You wanted this. He turned a little, looking at the woman-child in her umbu uniform, the stark white mask glinting with the rays of the early morning. That's the purpose of the test. To see if they'll leave him to die. She concluded, her head tilting to the side. I'm only not certain which outcome will cause them to succeed or fail. The Sannin smiled a little. They should do what proper Konoha ninjas should do. That's the only way to succeed. And Naruto? How will you judge him in his state? He'll pass, of course. You would take him as a student no matter what. That hardly seems fair. Life is fair? Tired face. It was not, by any stretch of the imagination, how she could have ever dreamed her shinobi career would start. She was feeling sicker than yesterday, her bones ached, she wanted nothing more than to lie down and sleep again, even as her stomach churned at the edge of nausea. Every muscle felt little better than overcooked noodles, flimsy and weak as she forced them to push her along in ever shorter leaps across the trees. And to think, she still had to carry him after Hachiba couldn't do it anymore. She coughed, stopping in her run to lean against the trunk of a tree. It sounded wet, she could almost taste the phlegm at the back of her throat as spittle specked the hand she'd used to cover her mouth. Hachiba stopped ahead of her, his pasty skin and black ringed eyes serving to only let her imagine how bad she must have looked as well. She was going to kill that snake bastard. She looked up, coiling her muscles again before jumping off. Keep going, even speaking felt like it leached out the energy from her. She tried to ignore the blood that had been mixed with the spit. Tired face. Are you seriously gonna let him have a team? Sarutobi sighed, it had been the third time she'd asked in twice as many minutes. And the 100th time since a week ago when her teammate, his student, first filed for the position. What do you want me to do exactly, Tsunade? Walk up to him and say, yes, well, seeing as how you've signed all the appropriate paperwork and properly filled out all agreements, clauses, guarantees, and have proceeded to do your due diligence well in time for the responsibility, I've decided to not grant this request despite the fact that I have no other reserve teachers on standby, simply because your motivations are iffy at best, and I don't trust you. And this is primarily based on a simple hunch of having known you for the last 20 years. How exactly do you view that as being anywhere near impartial as I'm supposed to be as Hokage? Oh, come on. You and I both know Orochimaru is practically the antithesis to Genin instructor. He trained Anko. One student who he took on long trips to train in private without doing anything below C rank. Does not a Genin instructor make? Maybe not, but we've always pressured him to interact with the villagers more. This time he'll have to with a large team. Yes. Because Orochimaru's people skills let him mingle oh so well. Do you remember the last time we managed to convince him to go to a festival? Sarutobi nearly winced. That had been interesting to say the very least. He can still train those students to be good, strong shinobi that will serve the village well. Do I really have to bring up the incident reports on Anko for this? Sarutobi rolled his eyes. All right, look. He's always had trouble with people, and he might not be the warmest of instructors, but the fact of the matter is that outside of using my executive powers as village leader to revoke his application, something that would be a very gross misuse of my authority given his results. Yes, I know your reservations on Anko Tsunade, he interrupted before she could start. The fact remains though that she is still one of our very best operatives for high-ranking assassinations. Her record outside the village can't be disputed, spotty as her record within the village walls might be. So yes, I am going to allow him his chance. His chance? She scoffed. You make it sound as if there's something other than personal ambition as the motivation here. The old monkey rubbed his temples. Did you two fight? Did he kill your pet? Or call you a dirty name and I miraculously missed the ensuing blowout or something? No, I just know him well enough to call out his BS. I'd trust him with my life, but that's my prerogative after fighting next to him for 20-some-odd years. And where I trust him, I can still very easily admit he's a complete dick half the time and not the best choice to be looking after preteens. I'm not going to take the team away from him, he stated flatly, leaning back in his seat. If you're really so interested in this, take your own private steps to assuage your worries as long as it doesn't blow up half the village, and yes, that is as close to a green light as you're gonna get to stick your nose in his business to a reasonable degree, but his request for a Genin team is going to be upheld. As much as you or I might hold reservations about the pseudo-parenting skills he'll need to help these students, the fact is he'll never get the opportunity to prove either of us wrong or right if we don't give him the chance every once in a blue moon. Can I come back here and kick you when this whole thing blows up? She asked with a look that could have scratched his face off. You're allowed to come back here and tell me I told you so. that much I'll grant. Tired face. It was a little past noon when it was her turn. Hachiba looked ready to keel over, breathing like a winded dog, coughing up half his lungs between breaths. She trudged over, feet slogging through the light mud of the forest floor. They'd long since abandoned the tree tops when it was clear their legs didn't have the strength to carry them in the jumps anymore. When she lifted Naruto, her arms nearly failed her, and it was obvious after a moment that she wouldn't be able to carry him like the child he was. She opted instead to lift him to lay across her shoulders, every muscle in her legs feeling as though it was being slowly carved open by flaying knives. She looked up at Hachiba. "Come on," she said, "let's just keep moving." He nodded, and soon enough they were both walking again. They didn't have the strength to run anymore. She had to focus to even do that. Concentrate on just putting one foot in front of the other, struggling with waning strength. Her insides burned, her throat bled, black fluid leaked from her tear ducts as blue veins became visible under pasty white skin. Worse and worse the symptoms grew as she focused on just putting one foot in front of the other. Then she tripped. She hadn't noticed the root, she could barely see the ground so clouded her vision was. It snagged on the top of her foot and she fell forward, not even having the presence of mind to break her fall. The breath left her lungs and Naruto's weight on her shoulders didn't help at all. She hissed, cursing as she struggled to draw in a proper breath amidst her coughs. She glanced up, watching as Hachiba kept walking. She would have called for him if she had the strength. She watching him keep walking as she struggled to get to her hands and knees. "Come on," she thought with a strangled hiss. "You still have a whole day left before you roll over and die in a ditch, damn it. Move." She got to her feet. When she looked down at the half-dead Naruto, she reached down to lift him. She only succeeded in nearly tripping again in the slick mud. When lifting him failed, she tried dragging. A sound not entirely unlike a giggle escaped her when she realized she was losing the strength in her fingers to make a firm enough grip to go with the lack of strength. She walked over to his side. She didn't know if she'd have the strength to stand back up. So, she didn't kneel. She kicked him. "Come on, you've been sleeping enough. Get up, I can't carry you anymore," and Hachiba left. "I'm talking to a corpse," she noted somewhere, ignoring it as she dug her foot into his ribs again. "Come on. Get up, you damn bastard." But he lay there, pale and unmoving, she wasn't even sure if he was breathing anymore. "Get up, get up." She kicked one more time with all her strength, and on this one her leg buckled beneath her, sending her to the ground where she was close enough to lift a fist and let it fall against his chest. "You're not supposed to die this easy," she hissed, unaware of the frustrated, angry tears that glimmered behind her eyes. "Get up, please." She tries to stand. She can't. "I don't want to die here." She's crying now, and the sobs are unmistakable this time. "Not here. Not in this forest. Not in some forgotten corner where that coward Hachiba would be the only one to survive. Enough." She doesn't recognize the voice. Doesn't even see the person before she's lifted by strong, calloused hands, hugging the fabric of a cloak as the sudden vertigo of her movement churns her guts with nausea all over again. "You're interfering with my exam." She recognizes that voice though. And she clutches the robe tighter, burying her face into the neck of the woman. "Your test is done." She hears her state flatly. The voice jumping from the pulse point of her neck against Ryoko's cheek. The woman starts walking and before long she's carried out of the forest. As she leaves, she notices that little, pleased smile on that horrid, pale face. It's a leering wicked thing to her eye, one that sends a shiver down her spine. She closes her eyes and thanks whatever might be listening out there for ending this nightmare. Tired face. It was hours after this that he woke to a white ceiling. Not exactly unfamiliar. What was unfamiliar was the fact that he was feeling, all things considered, great. Seeing as how his last memories was of a poison-induced blackout, he rather suspected he should be feeling a bit crappier, truth be told. He sat up, surprised to find Dan sleeping in a corner of the room, a trail of drool leaking from the corner of his mouth to trail down his cheek. "Dash," he croaked. His throat was dry. Why did that always seem to happen when he woke up at the hospital? He reached for the bedside table where a full glass of water was waiting for him. Evidently, Tsunade knew better with so many patients. He drank the warm water gratefully, swallowing and gasping for breath when he was done. Dan. The white-haired man jumped a bit, scrunching up his features at the foul taste in his mouth. Ugh. Oh hey kiddo, you're up. How the heck did I even get here? Where are Hachiba and Ryoko? Umbu carried you in. Dan explained. Suchan was having an apoplectic fit, I swear. She stormed out after she was sure you and your teammate would be safe. Damn near destroyed the forest of death and the bloodbath that followed. Naruto paled. Tsunade had gone to fight that snake bastard alone? Is she alright? What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be helping her? Dan smirked. Me? Get between a fight Tsunade's having with Oro? I'm good, but I ain't that good. Besides, if I do, she'll complain about not getting enough exercise later. Naruto's mouth was hanging slightly open. You know. You could be a little more, I don't know, concerned maybe? He tried to kill me and my teammates. What makes you think he wouldn't do dash? Actually, he didn't. Dan interrupted with a lazy shrug. The drugs he pumped into you were a real nasty mix, but it wasn't anything lethal. You've been sitting here for 3 or 4 hours with Tsuchan's seal letting it run its course faster. It dissolves into little more than water after it done a fair job of making you feel miserable and sick for a few days. The silver-haired man scratched his chin. Gotta give him points for creativity if nothing else. The blonde blinked. He didn't poison us? Dan shook his head. I know you've lost your memories, kiddo, but one thing you can count on is the fact that you're probably one of the only people that's actually safe from Oro. He held you when you were a baby, you know. I think you're the only kid besides Anko he might actually like. That's not very reassuring. The door opened and Naruto was greeted to the sight of Tsunade, scratched, mud-covered, irritated Tsunade. She looked at Dan. Keep the count, 11 even. The white-haired man nodded. She looked back at Naruto, the hard glint vanishing from her eyes. Hey kiddo. She greeted, marching in, green hands already focusing with chakra. Nothing missing? She asked. Nah. He answered. I feel fine actually. How are Ryoko and Hachiba? Ryoko's still in her room. She answered. Sleeping it off. Hachiba was picked up by his parents an hour or so ago from what I'm told. They're both okay. And the snake? She smirked. What do you think? Tired face. The next day Orochimaru was still cradling his skull with an ice pack, sitting in his home resting from Tsunade's wrath. Unlike her, he didn't have the luxury of just healing everything and moving along like a fiddle. He gave as good as he got in any non-lethal match, but with her it always had the rather distinct irritating factor of seeing her prancing around without a care for the odd broken bone or two after it was done. Meanwhile he was here nursing a bruise the size of the village monument on his ribs, and what felt like a cracked skull. Seeing as how the only medic he'd trust to come within 10 feet of him was the one that inflicted these injuries, he was stuck healing the old-fashioned way for the most part. Still, he'd managed to write up and file his report before her rampage had thundered along to find him, having sent it off via summoned snake to deliver it to the proper archivists. He'd have taken it himself if he hadn't made a point to avoid property damage. Tsunade certainly wouldn't have half the mind to avoid given her anger if they'd met in the village proper. And people said he wasn't considerate. There was a knock on his door, and he tried to sense if it was Tsunade, Sarutobi or Anko, his usual visitors. He couldn't tell. He blamed the cracked skull. It's open. He called instead. The door slammed open, the knob cracking against the wall. Tsunade then. Back for round 2 already? The voice that reached out to his consciousness was certainly not hers though, and the words made him want to choke this person. Was this your idea the entire time? He was sorely tempted to smother himself with the ice pack. What dash, he croaked out. Nefarious, twisted little scheme have I concocted in my mind this time? Am I guilty of poisoning the village's water supply? Consuming the souls of newborn children? Lining the village's flower shops with an overabundance of fertilizer, creating giant green monstrosities that will consume us all? What else could I have done this week, my dear Zae, that I am greeted by such sweet accusations? You know damn well what you did. The little woman stormed into his home, removing her scarf and her coat to stave off the late November chill. She was little above eye level even with him sitting down. She threw down a piece of paper on the coffee table he was propping his feet on, pointing at it as though it was a condemned criminal. You gave them a test they couldn't pass just so you could fail them and pass Naruto all on his own. Orochimaru made an effort to raise his head, glaring with a deadpan stare, all the fury of a sleep-deprived, pain sanin in his gaze. They should have acted as ninja. He said simply Naruto was dead weight and they had to leave him. The girl stubbornly refused and the boy let himself be cowed. Neither one of them deserved to be genin of Konoha. Yes. How convenient. And if they would have left him, you'd be turning right around and saying that they should have been loyal to their teammate and tried to save him before abandoning him. She placed her hands on her hips, glaring at him with that ever-present purse of her lips that vaguely resembled a scowl. Is mind reading one of your many talents, Zae? Oh please, I taught you for the first 4 years of your career, and your reputation is hardly spotless. This stinks to high heaven. She scoffed, bringing her hands up to an air quote act as Shinobi should have. You love the word play and the games. You've always loved tricking people while telling them a half-truth, or a whole truth. You practically get off on it. Yes, well, it's not your decision to make. Sarutobi is the one that ultimately decides in. Oh bollocks. She waved aside his statement. He has to give deference to you because you were there, and even if he didn't have to do that, he'd go along with it because more than anything else he needs strong ninja. Anko speaks for your results as is, so he wouldn't really object to you taking Naruto on as a private apprentice. He let his head fall back with a sigh through his nostrils. Don't you seem to be getting awfully angry about T-dash? Damn right I am. They're my students and I'm not going to let you screw around with their futures. Futures that they've justly earned. Their only mistake here was getting assigned an up-jumped arrogant schmuck like you as their sensei with dreams of training the next god of ninja, or whatever's going on in that head of yours. He rolled his eyes, taking a breath. Is there a point to this shouting match? Yes, there is. You're not failing Ryoko. Ryoko? Not the boy? He left. She stated simply. Another year at the academy will do good for his discipline. Ryoko did her very best, and she deserves to pass. So, you're passing her. You're giving me orders, no dash. I'm old, crazy and cranky, damn it, I get to give orders. He would argue that point, but then he recalled the Konoha leadership. Sarutobi, Hamura, Koharu, the daimyo, the Hyuga clan elders. Somehow, he felt they might be a tad bit biased if he brought up the issue. She took a breath. You know I'm right. And you know somewhere in that little head of yours, though God knows you'd stab yourself in the tongue before admitting it, that she did what was right. So, you'll pass her. She said as though his protests were inconsequential and he'd already agreed. Now why exactly do you look little better than roadkill? Was it Tsunade? No, it was the other woman with a temper and enough strength in her finger to level a building. She always did know how to give you a good kick to the head when you needed it. Zae chuckled, all crooked teeth and laugh lines. HRMPH. I'll make you some chicken soup and you'll feel better. she said, sounding so much like the kindly little witch she pretended to be. Then you'll write up a new report for the Hokage on your team. She patted him on the knee as she passed by, and Orochimaru only briefly wondered at the absurdity of anyone making him chicken soup. Let alone one doing so after they'd come in here with the proverbial rock in hand. He supposed stranger things had happened. And what's all this mess here? He heard her call from the kitchen. I know you don't entertain guests, but that's no reason to be unkempt. He rolled his eyes. On second thought, being chastised for his cleaning habits by a god only knows how old academy instructor in his own home might be the oddest thing that had happened to him in his career. Tired face. It was nearly 2 days later that found Naruto and Ryoko sitting in the Hokage's office, waiting for the old man to show up. Hey. He greeted. Hey yourself. She answered back. Feeling better, princess? Naruto's nose scrunched in distaste. Princess? We had to carry your ass like one. I was gonna go with damsel in distress, but that's just too long to say in conversation. She groused, not at all amused at the frustration and fear Naruto's 5-year-old constitution had brought her. Naruto was tempted to protest, but seeing as how she had, technically put her life at risk to save him, he was willing to let it go. Sorry, I wasn't more of a help. She shrugged. Guess it wasn't your fault. The snake dash. The door opened, bringing their attention towards Sarutobi as the aged Hokage entered, a kindly smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Naruto-kun. Ryoko-chan. Ryoko stood and bowed awkwardly, utterly unused to the act. Hokage-sama. Hey old man. She gave him an odd look as Sarutobi ruffled his hair and patted her on the shoulder before walking by them to sit on his chair. He took off his hat, revealing his liver-spotted scalp. Word is you two had an interesting exam. Your student's a whack job. Ryoko blurted out before she blushed, remembering who she was talking to. That snake's bad news, old man. Naruto growled. Sarutobi looked sadly at the boy. To think he'd once been so very fond of the pale Sannin. Yes, well. He leaned forward, lacing his fingers in front of his mouth in a way that reminded Naruto of his Tsunade. The fact is you two passed your exam. Hachiba didn't? No one missed the cheerful gleam in her eyes when she asked. No. Orochimaru has deemed him unfit to be a genin as of yet. Given his panic, I'm inclined to agree. But you two passed his exam, and that means you two, and whatever genin he chooses from the reserve roster will be his students. You're leaving us with him? Ryoko asked, incredulous. His methods were unorthodox, and I realize you might have trouble working with him. So, I'm offering you a choice of staying on, or being relegated into the genin reserve list until another team can be found for you. How long would we be on the reserves? Unknown, it depends on how badly sensei need a new teammate. Could be months, could be a few years, though that's rare. The average is a year or two, with the most fill-ins being due to the genin passing on to becoming chunin as opposed to the death of a squadmate. Naruto bit the inside of his cheek. Despite his record, no sensei in their right mind would take a 5-year-old to a chunin examination. Without the odd outlier or desperate team, he'd most likely be stuck on that reserve list until he was within a far more acceptable age. You don't have any other available jounin? Sarutobi shook his head. None really, and to be honest, I suspect Orochimaru's involvement in that. When he wants something, he plans its acquisition like a military campaign. And right now, he wants this team. The only wild card he can't factor in is your respective acceptances of going on the reserve lists. Naruto seethed at the simple circumstance that he couldn't wait. Every day was one day less in the ever-shortening timespan he had to prepare for Akatsuki, for Toby. Even now that guy was going around the elemental nations laying the groundwork for everything he had lost. He couldn't sit around with his thumb up his ass. He had to get past being a genin, and he had to do it quick. If he had to do it while keeping one eye open for a snake behind his back, so be it. I'm not going on the reserves," he announced resolutely. "I'll ask for a sensei transfer 6 months from now, but I'm not going on the reserves." Sarutobi raised an eyebrow, curious, but he didn't press for information as he turned to Ryoko. "And you, Ryoko-chan?" The gray-haired girl frowned, almost scowled, glaring at Naruto before turning back to him. "I ain't quitting either." He had a distinct impression that it was more a competitive nature than good judgment at work there. "Still." "Very well. Then you are officially Team 8 under the guide of Jounin Orochimaru. Report to Training Ground 17 tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I'll send word to your sensei of your acceptance later today." And just like that, their genin life was officially underway. Chapter 9. Naruto really didn't want to say what was becoming rather apparent. He really didn't. So, he'd just settle for saying that studying under Orochimaru was not what he'd been expecting, and he'd been expecting quite a few things. He was, in comparison to the other teachers he'd had beforehand. He was not going to give the man a compliment. He would settle on a perfectionist and demanded such in both his students' ability to learn and his ability to teach. In short, he wouldn't let up until you could do whatever it was he was asking you to do. Jiraiya and Kakashi were very hands-off teachers. The only teacher he had that Orochimaru somewhat resembled in methodology was B. The former two would give you a concept, and throw you to the proverbial wolves to figure it out. Learning by doing and such. B had guided him along to learn how to be in harmony with Kurama. Though, he wondered half the time if the circumstances were what kept him so attentive as opposed to his own teaching practices. B seemed like he would have preferred to be writing up a song or something as opposed to lecturing. Orochimaru, though, was attentive to everything. The first thing he'd done with them was have them fight him, no ninjutsu or genjutsu allowed, just pure taijutsu. They hadn't touched him, of course, that wasn't the purpose. They fought him in hand-to-hand for several hours, with the snake occasionally pulling off some strange maneuver Naruto'd never even dreamed of to attack or forcing them to break away from standard academy taijutsu. As he was fighting them, Orochimaru broke down absolutely every aspect of their physical makeup/fighting preferences. Every tell that they had, how they leaned, where they looked, what they tried to do by instinct, whether it was block, dodge or counter, he catalogued, and then informed them of what he'd seen later, when they'd been eating their lunch. "The first thing I'll do with you two is teach you both a new taijutsu style. The academy basics are a one-size-fits-all form that is there out of necessity. Now that you are my soldiers, it is my job to hone you into the weapons you will one day become. And the first step is learning how to win at a simple fist fight." Ryoko had questioned him on such. Everyone knew that out of the two remaining Sannin, Orochimaru was by far the most well-versed in the arts of ninjutsu. A ninja's life is measured in the chakra he has. For most, this means that once they've run out of this precious resource, they might as well be dead. Even a shinobi several times weaker, or even a simple samurai, could end their lives with little more than a knife. Before I teach either of you how to spend your own share of this precious resource, I will first teach you to turn the knife against that weaker shinobi. How to defend yourself and ultimately kill whatever wishes to turn you into prey with your bare hands. As my soldiers, you are reflections of myself. And I will not be found wanting by having one of you die to a simple brigand with a good sword arm. The very next day, he brought them both scrolls for stretches and exercises that had to be completed every morning before training, and every week he would test them to see how well they could pull their respective exercises off. If they failed, well, let's just say they didn't exactly want a repeat performance, and leave it at that. Training consisted of drills. Every day over and over they would do a variety of physical exercises, from running to push-ups to crunches and so on, followed by the early katas of their taijutsu styles, with one Orochi leading Ryoko and the other helping Naruto. Ryoko's style, from what Naruto could gather, was fast. Using quick hand strikes, ones that could easily incorporate kunai or shuriken held in the hands, and flexibility to avoid or absorb attacks as opposed to a more meat and potatoes blocking punching. He vaguely wondered if it was the so-called snake style, and that she'd learn to eventually seize openings and exploit pressure points and such. With him, however, it would still be a great number of years before he was anywhere near a physical capacity to go pound for pound with a full-grown civilian, let alone a shinobi. So, his style was focused on kicks and knives. The leg, of course, being far larger than the fist, also carried the most amount of power and reach, something he sorely lacked. The only thing he was using his hands for was the occasional block and the acrobatic dodge. The entire style revolved around quick footwork and powerful chakra-enhanced blows. The knives came into play when he grappled. Given his small size, it wasn't out of the question for him to nimbly latch onto a whole limb, be it a leg or an arm. Where most fighters could take these limbs and break them through sheer brute power, he could just latch onto them like a gnat and keep cutting till he disabled the limb, or hit something vital. And given the amount of veins and arteries present in the hips, legs, arms and biceps, killing a man who overextended his punch wouldn't take very long. He kept on insisting ninjutsu would level the playing field even further, but the snake was flatly refusing, even sabotaging his and Ryoko's own efforts to go to the Konoha library and find some stuff for themselves. Somehow, he'd gotten Gigi to sign an order for the employees to not let either of them into the shinobi sections of the library. He didn't even know such an order existed. So, in that aspect at least he could take some petty satisfaction at calling the Sannin a prick in this regard. Still didn't change the fact that he was cut off from any easy ninjutsu sources. He would practice some of his own techniques privately if he ever had a private moment. Where Kakashi-sensei was no longer watching him during days, because he was training with the snake, and Chan still watched him at night. While he kinda liked the faceless woman, she was really killing any opportunity he might have had to be discreet. Hey! The blonde looked up, finding the gray-haired Ryoko standing at the road ahead. Oh hey! He greeted with a smile. You're up earlier than usual. She shrugged. Or you just slept in later than usual. Come on, let's walk. They made their way down the road, the early morning cold finally dissipating to make way for the sun's warmth. So, he ventured by way of conversation. When do you think we'll get a mission? It's almost been 2 months. D rank sucked, but at least now, knowing what to expect, he could take some vindictive pleasure in watching Ryoko's reaction to the news that their missions would be little more than chores people were too lazy to do themselves. Dunno. When he's happy with our taijutsu, I guess. She answered, lacing her hands back behind her head as she strolled along. It sucks that he's not teaching us any ninjutsu though. I mean, what kind of ninja can you be with just the academy stuff under your belt? I know this Uchiha kid, younger than me by a year, and he can already spit fireballs. I want to burn annoying people too. She seemed to smile in delight at the prospect. Naruto's sweat dropped a bit at that. When they arrived, Orochimaru, as usual, was already there waiting for them. It was with some surprise though that they took notice of someone else. Naruto, Ryoko. He said by way of greeting, not even lifting his eyes from the paper scroll he was unfurling in one hand and refurling in the other as he read it. Meet your new teammate, Kyofu. She was a tall girl, older than both of them easy. Dark purple hair that trailed down towards her lower back in a straight cascade, mocha skin deigned some ancestry from Kumogakure. It was a stark contrast to Ryoko's silver gray, Anko-like style. Naruto would say she was, if not 15 then very close to it. Now his lack of age was even more apparent. As was his rather obvious height challenge. He could barely even reach Kyofu's stomach right now. It was stupid to be irritated at that, given that he graduated at barely 6, but there it was. Still, he decided to try breaking the ice a bit. Hi there. He said with a little forced cheer as he extended his hand. She smiled politely, taking his hand, though the hesitation was evident. Uzumaki-san, I presume? I heard you were young but dash. Your introductions can be done later. Orochimaru interrupted neutrally, rolling the scroll closed and tying both rolls together with a rope. Today we'll begin your chakra control training. You're one step closer to the lauded field ninjutsu with this. Why can't you just give us something? Ryoko complained. The other teams have already learned dash. I don't care what the other teams have learned or not learned. The pale man interrupted. You are a team. He stressed. You will learn at the same pace and will function entirely as a team, as a single entity, not three. Your skills must be to par with each other to cover the weaknesses of each other. He paused for a moment, either to gather his thoughts, or to allow his words a moment to sink in. You are Genin. As such, you are expected to work with others because your weaknesses are evident and substantial, and will continue to be such well into the rank of Chunin, where you will still perform the function as a piece of a greater fighting body. Only when you become Jounin will you be trusted to complete objectives alone. And even then, you will function as a leader, not an independent entity. The same is true of even the Umbu Corps. Only Hunter Nin can work solo. Naruto muttered to himself, but in the empty clearing he was heard easily by the others, with Ryoko and Kyofu throwing a quick look his way at the sound of his voice before returning their eyes to Orochimaru. And you are all a far cry from being Hunter Nin. He finished. Now if there are no further complaints, we will begin our exercises. Tired face. So how long have you been a Genin? Ryoko asked as they sat in a semicircle. About 3 or 4 hours later, they were eating some toilet paper tasting rations. Dry as bone meal with some lukewarm water. It didn't take Naruto long to get used to them again. She still made a face though, and Kyofu had seemed as surprised as either of them had been before. She too scrunched up her face like she'd just been punched in the throat. The raven-haired girl coughed, drinking greedily to wet her dry as sandpaper throat. 3 years now. My teammates managed to pass our second try for the Chunin exams. I was injured and couldn't keep going halfway through the test. Clearly it hurt her pride to admit as much. When are the next exams? Naruto cut in, his voice eager, a strange glint in his eye. A serpentine gaze took note of that detail. In about 5 more months if I'm not mistaken. She answered with a shrug. I've been on the reserves list for about a year, so I haven't been following. 10 minutes. Aro called out, warning them of the impending end of the break and the fact that they would soon have to get ready to continue their exercises. As tasteless as the damn things were, Naruto and Ryoko had learned quick enough to scarf them down before time was up. Luckily Kyofu followed their example. Tired face. It was approaching sunset when Orochimaru let them go, the evening sky lit up with the flares of orange and purples as the sun dipped below the horizon. That was pretty intense. Their latest addition groused, wincing a bit with each step. We get to do it again tomorrow. Ryoko hissed, rubbing her stomach where her abs were currently making their displeasure known. Getting the concept of tree walking down had largely lost its luster when the Sannin demanded they each do a set of 30 crunches while hanging upside down from the tree. Their feet to the branches and heads to the ground. The pain had largely fractured her delicate knowledge of chakra control. Naruto and Kyofu had managed to hold themselves up though, much to her irritation. Naruto nodded. With 5 months left before the next exams, it was likely that they would get to ninjutsu by then, which was a serious supplement he needed to his punching power no matter what taijutsu style Orochimaru was trying to drill into. He paused, his heightened senses of the diluted nature chakra rushing through his coils, going off like a flare in his thoughts. There was a very familiar presence just a little way off to the side. He grinned like a Cheshire cat. I'll see you guys in a bit, he said quickly before swiftly swiveling around on his heel to head down a different road. What was that about? Kyofu questioned with a raised eyebrow. Ryoko shrugged. How should I know? Naruto meanwhile very nearly seemed to slither between the people of the late evening, coiling through them like a bloodhound on a mission as he honed in on the presence that had caught his attention. He walked up to a raven-haired woman wearing a red and black hakama and haori, examining a piece of fruit on the market stand. He smiled as he walked up behind her. Unchan. he cried exuberantly, as loud and high-pitched as his 6-year-old voice allowed. The woman seemed to straighten before slowly turning around, one eyebrow hooked high on her forehead. "Naruto-kun," she said, onyx black eyes showing little surprise outside of the initial stiffening of her shoulders. Naruto grinned in response, quickly coming to 3 conclusions. 1. She was young. Well, younger than he thought she'd be. In fact, he'd say she may just be at Kyofu's age. Though she was an inch or 2 taller, which with the mask and voice muffling had probably attributed for her to seem like she was already in her 20s or so. 2. "You're pretty," he exclaimed, as blunt and truthful now as he'd always been. The eyebrow arched up just a little further, and a seldom-seen smirk graced her features. "Thank you," she said with just the slightest inflection in her tone to note her approval of the compliment. "Perhaps someday I'll say the same to you." Naruto smiled, happy at that he'd gotten her to joke, even if it was a little at his expense. Anchan was just so serious all the time. And 3, she was definitely familiar. He had seen her before. But for the life of him he just couldn't recall where. It was infuriating, like something just on the tip of your tongue, or the edge of thought. She hadn't been an enemy, he knew that much. He could remember all the enemies. Especially those he'd had to put down more than once. So who in the hell was SH? "Nei-san." Another voice cried out, and Naruto turned to look only to freeze in place. Running towards them was a mini Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto's eyes darted from his one-time friend and rival onto Anchan, and back, his mind quickly forming conclusions that just as rapidly felt as though they were crashing into sudden brick walls, grinding every thought to a blindingly fast halt. "No way. Otuto," she said, kneeling down to be at eye level with her now confirmed younger brother as he came in close. He could almost hear the crashing sound every upper cognitive function made when Sasuke stood in front of her, holding out a kunai pouch. "Itachi-ne, can we get these?" the little Sasuke asked, smiling as Itachi took the pouch in her hand. "We can," she assured before handing it to him. "But first you have to give it back. Technically, you just stole old man Ichisu's merchandise, Ototo," she chided, jerking her head to indicate a somewhat irritated-looking stall clerk. Sasuke blushed, nodding. Before he left though he looked behind her. "Who's he?" Itachi turned as she spoke. "This is Dash." She paused at the sight of him. Naruto was an expressive child. But as expressive as he was, one of the things she'd yet to see on his face was terror. It was plain as day to see on his face now. He was pale as a ghost, his pupils had narrowed down into pinpricks, she caught twitches in his fingers. Twitches that she could almost suspect to be quick-draw motions. A reflex. But that shouldn't be possible at his age. "Uzumaki Naruto," she finished, standing up to her full height and keeping her eyes on the boy. Before she could fully gather her thoughts, Sasuke, normally a reserved child, stepped forward, oblivious to the myriad of emotions playing behind Naruto's eyes. "Hi. Uchiha Sasuke." He extended his hand. Naruto seemed to snap out of whatever dazed stupor he found himself in fast enough to plaster on a brittle glass smile as he extended his hand to shake Sasuke's. "Uzumaki Naruto. Future Hokage," he announced loudly. "Hokage? Hokage?" He's never expressed an interest in such a thing before. She saw Sasuke opening his mouth to speak when she clamped her hand down on his shoulder, bringing his attention up to her. "Go," she demanded gently, a subtle genjutsu layered into her words to make him more compliant. "I'll get you the kunai in a bit. But give them back before Ichisu calls the police on you." He nodded. "See you later then, Naruto-san," he called as he walked away. She was startled when Naruto immediately turned to leave, as though there was a lash at his back. She grabbed at his arm. And when he turned, there was no mistake in her eyes, and she saw his fingers reach for a kunai pouch that was not there, and his hand strike with empty fingers at what would have been the artery along her left inner bicep. There was no wild flailing, no wasted movements had that hand been armed, and had she been anyone else he would have cut her, and made an escape before anyone was the wiser. That was an assassin's strike. She gripped his arm harder, now holding him still. With quick, subtle trickery, she ensnared those within the vicinity in an illusion, forming a clone to take her place as she vanished with her nighttime charge. Whomever was nosy enough to keep watching believing that she had just sent Naruto off and turned to buy the goods with her sibling. In reality, she appeared 2 blocks away, on one of the higher rooftops for some semblance of privacy as she let Naruto, who'd been tugging against her, go. The frightened Genin looked around, beginning to hyperventilate as his movements became slightly erratic. Naruto! Naruto! She called twice as he didn't respond to the first. Can you hear me? Do you know where you are? We're dash. He pants, his breathing is wild, the blood thunders through his temples, drowning out the sound as his heart pounds and pounds and pounds like it's about to burst in his chest. We're in the marshes of Kusa. It's a skirmish. Wait, was it? Yes. I'm fighting in the rear guard, a fighting retreat. Sakura is up ahead, leading the wounded. She is right? Or is she dead already? No. No, she dies, later. Sasuke's with me, or is it B? I can't remember. We're fighting what was once the Shodan Tsuchikige's elite bodyguard Umbu. We're fighting back to back. But the mud is slick. Sasuke falls. Or was it B? I go to pick him up, he gives me his hand. Someone grabs my arm. I turn, bury the kunai into the artery with an explosive note. It goes off, takes the arm with it. It doesn't hurt me, Kurama helps with that. And then we're in Konoha and Shan. He answers, smiling. I can see Gigi's face. He points. Her eyes narrow, leery. What happened down there? Down where? His eyes are still erratic, his heart is hammering beneath his breast so hard it hurts. But he's perfected this mask. An old well-worn friend, you could say. She's not fully buying it though. What she'd seen couldn't just be wiped away. Did you remember something? Or think you remembered something? There is screaming and blood, I remember that. The smell most of all. The sting of iron will never. Maybe, He scrunches up his nose. What are we doing up here? Weren't we in the market with your little brother? Yes, we were. She nods. What's the last thing you remember? Sasuke's his name. He smiled. I remember Sasuke's his name. A smile made of brittle, cracking glass. Naruto's always been a very expressive boy. She finds it unnerving then, that she can't read him right now. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.